Good evening and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm your host, and it's Sunday, May 17th, 2026. Great to have you with us as we wrap up another weekend and get ready for the week ahead. Let's start with what's happening outside your window here in northern Illinois. Right now, it's a pleasant 71.5 degrees, feeling like 72, with mainly clear skies and winds at about 9 miles per hour. We actually hit a high of just over 80 degrees today under overcast conditions, with a low overnight of 61.5. Tomorrow, Monday, we're looking at similar warmth with a high of nearly 82, but expect some drizzle and about 1/4 of an inch of precipitation. Things cool down through the week, with Tuesday hitting the mid-70s, then dropping into the upper 50s by Wednesday and Thursday as we stay mostly overcast. If you've got outdoor plans early this week, might want to keep an umbrella handy for Monday. On today's episode, we've got quite a spread for you. We're diving into some fascinating tech stories, including someone who turned an $80 Android tablet into a full Debian Linux workstation, a new code search tool that's dramatically more efficient than grep, and we'll talk about Mercurial version control celebrating 20 years. On the security front, we have a critical Windows 0 day called MiniPlasma that's giving system-level access, multiple WordPress plugin vulnerabilities being actively exploited, and some significant updates from Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. We'll also walk through the latest CISA-known exploited vulnerabilities and look at some serious threat intelligence from Palo Alto's Unit 42 about Active Directory exploitation and some evolved Stealer malware. It's going to be a comprehensive show, so let's get right into it. Starting with our tech news, over on Hacker News there's a project that caught a lot of attention, scoring 264 points with 122 comments. Someone documented how they turned an $80 RK3562 Android tablet into a fully functional Debian Linux workstation. I'll link the GitHub repository in the show notes. What makes this interesting isn't just the cost savings, it's what this represents for hardware repurposing and the flexibility of Linux. The RK3562 is a Rockchip ARM processor that you typically find in budget Android devices, and this project shows how, with the right kernel work and some determination, you can completely transform the purpose of commodity hardware. This matters because we're seeing more interest in alternative computing platforms, especially as people look for ways to extend the life of devices that might otherwise become e-waste. The documentation on GitHub covers the entire process, and the community discussion has been robust, with people sharing their own experiences doing similar conversions. Staying on Hacker News, there's a Show HN post about a tool called Semble that's getting significant traction, 182 points with 45 comments. Semble is a code search tool specifically designed for AI agents, and here's what makes it notable. It uses 98% fewer tokens than grep. Now, if you're working with large language models and AI coding agents, token usage directly translates to cost and latency. Traditional tools like grep aren't optimized for how AI agents consume information. They return verbose output that needs to be parsed and contextualized. Semble, according to the developers at Minish Lab, structures its output in a way that's immediately useful to language models while being dramatically more concise. This is part of a broader trend we're seeing where traditional developer tools are being rethought and redesigned specifically for AI-assisted development workflows. The efficiency gains here aren't trivial. Reducing token usage by 98% could make the difference between a viable automated workflow and one that's too expensive or slow to be practical. Moving to another interesting story from Hacker News, there's a video from FOSDEM 2026 that scored 164 points titled, Mercurial, 20 Years and Counting. How are we still alive and kicking? This is fascinating because Mercurial is version control software that many people assume died when Git became dominant, especially after major platforms like Bitbucket dropped Mercurial support. But Mercurial is not only still around, it's still being actively developed and used in production at major organizations. The FOSDEM talk, I'll have the link in the show notes, addresses this directly with the subtitle, Ain't You Dead Yet? What keeps Mercurial relevant is that it made different design choices than Git, choices that some teams find more intuitive and better suited to certain workflows. It's written in Python, it has a more consistent command interface, and it handles certain operations, particularly around large repositories and branching models, in ways that some organizations prefer. The fact that it survived 2 decades and remains viable is a testament to the value of diversity in tooling. Not every problem needs to be solved with the most popular tool. Sometimes the second or third most popular option is actually the better fit. Ars Technica has a story about how solar power production is being undercut by coal pollution. This is one of those unintended consequences stories that really highlights the complexity of the energy transition. Researchers have found that air pollution from coal-fired power plants, particularly particulate matter, reduces the efficiency of solar panels by blocking and scattering sunlight before it reaches the panels. In regions where coal plants operate near solar installations, this can reduce solar output by significant percentages. The irony is striking. The very energy source we're trying to replace with solar is actively making solar less efficient. This has real implications for renewable energy planning. If you're calculating the expected output of a solar installation, you need to factor in not just weather and seasonal variations, but also local air quality. In places like India and China, where coal still dominates the energy mix and solar is being rapidly deployed, this effect could be substantial. It also adds another dimension to the true cost of coal power. It's not just the direct emissions, it's also the reduction in efficiency of clean energy alternatives. Ars Technica also reports that the US government is betting on AI to catch insider trading in prediction markets. Prediction markets have become increasingly popular and sophisticated, platforms where people essentially bet on the outcomes of future events using real money. The problem is that these markets can be manipulated by people with inside knowledge. If you know a company is about to announce a major product, or you have advanced knowledge of a political decision, you can profit substantially from that information on a prediction market. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission is now deploying AI systems to detect unusual trading patterns that might indicate insider trading. The AI looks for things like sudden large positions taken just before major announcements, patterns of winning bets that exceed what statistical analysis would predict, and networks of coordinated trading that might indicate information sharing. This is actually a sensible application of AI. The patterns of insider trading are often subtle and hidden in large volumes of normal trading activity. Human analysts can miss them, but machine learning systems can process massive amounts of data looking for anomalies. The challenge, of course, is false positives and ensuring that the systems don't flag legitimate informed speculation as illegal insider trading. On Lobsters, there's a post titled "Don't Answer the First Question" that scored 20 points, and it's about software development practices. The core insight is that when someone comes to you with a technical question or a feature request, the first question they ask is often not actually the question they need answered. They've already done some problem solving in their head, made assumptions about the solution, and formulated a question based on those assumptions. If you just answer that surface question, you might be solving the wrong problem. The post advocates for going deeper, asking why they need what they're asking for, understanding the underlying goal. This is something experienced developers learn over time, but it's worth making explicit. Someone might ask, how do I make this database query faster? When the real issue is that they're running the query too frequently because of an architectural problem. Someone might ask about implementing a complex feature when what they actually need is a simpler workflow change. This ties into the XY problem, a classic pattern in technical communication where people ask about their attempted solution rather than their actual problem. The practice advice is to spend time on discovery before jumping into implementation, even when there's pressure to move fast. There's also a story on Lobsters about FreeBSD getting a new website design. FreeBSD, for those not familiar, is one of the major open-source Unix-like operating systems, used in everything from network infrastructure to PlayStation consoles. The project has launched a redesigned website, and while that might seem like inside baseball for FreeBSD users, it's actually significant because it represents the project's efforts to be more accessible and welcoming to new users. Open-source operating system projects sometimes struggle with presentation and user experience. Their websites can be technically comprehensive, but intimidating to newcomers. The new FreeBSD site is cleaner, more modern, and better organized. This matters because operating systems like FreeBSD fill important niches, particularly in networking and server applications where their licensing and architecture offer advantages over Linux. Making the project more approachable helps ensure it continues to attract contributors and users. And one more from Lobsters that's quite interesting. Someone got Adobe Lightroom, the photo editing software, working on Linux using Claude Code. This scored 20 points. For context, Adobe has traditionally not supported Linux for their Creative Suite applications, which has been a major pain point for photographers and creative professionals who prefer Linux. What happened here is someone used Claude, Anthropic's AI assistant, to work through the complex process of getting Lightroom running under Wine or similar compatibility layers. The GitHub repository documents the entire process. This represents something significant about where AI-assisted technical problem solving is going. Getting Windows applications to run on Linux has traditionally required deep technical knowledge, lots of trial and error, and reading through scattered forum posts. Having an AI assistant that can work through that process, try different approaches, debug errors, and eventually arrive at a working solution, that's a real force multiplier. It's not that the AI is doing anything a skilled human couldn't do, it's that it makes that expertise more accessible and reduces the time investment dramatically. Now let's move into our security briefing, and we've got quite a bit to cover today, starting with some critical vulnerabilities and active exploits. Bleeping Computer is reporting on a new Windows zero-day vulnerability called MiniPlasma that gives system-level access, and a proof of concept has been released. This is serious. MiniPlasma is a privilege escalation vulnerability, meaning an attacker who already has some level of access to a Windows system can use this to gain full system privileges. That's essentially complete control over the computer. The vulnerability exists in Windows itself, not in a third-party application, which makes it particularly concerning. When a proof of concept is publicly released before a patch is available, that's a race condition for defenders. Organizations need to be implementing compensating controls, enhanced monitoring for unusual privilege escalation attempts, and preparing to deploy the patch the moment Microsoft releases it. The name MiniPlasma isn't an official designation, it's what the security community is calling it. We don't have a CVE number yet, but this is something system administrators need to be tracking closely. Bleeping Computer also reports that a phishing campaign called Tycoon2FA is hijacking Microsoft 365 accounts using something called device code phishing. This is an interesting evolution of phishing attacks. Traditional phishing typically tries to steal your username and password. More sophisticated phishing tries to bypass two-factor authentication by using reverse proxies or real-time phishing. Device code phishing is different. It exploits a legitimate authentication flow that Microsoft and other providers use for devices that don't have good input methods or web browsers. Think smart TVS or command line tools. In device code authentication, the service gives you a code. You go to a website on another device, enter the code, and authenticate. Tycoon2FA is tricking victims into completing this device code authentication flow, which grants the attacker access to the account even when multi-factor authentication is enabled. This is significant because device code authentication is a legitimate feature that serves a real purpose, but like many convenience features, it can be abused. Organizations using Microsoft 365 need to ensure their users are trained to recognize these attacks and should consider whether they need to have device code authentication enabled at all. There's a troubling story from Bleeping Computer about Microsoft rejecting a critical Azure vulnerability report with no CVE being issued. This is concerning from a security disclosure perspective. A researcher apparently found what they believed to be a critical vulnerability in Microsoft Azure, reported it through proper channels, and Microsoft's response was to reject the report and not issue a CVE. Now, there could be legitimate reasons for this. Microsoft might have determined it wasn't actually exploitable in the way the researcher thought, or it might be a configuration issue rather than a vulnerability. But from the outside, this creates uncertainty. If researchers find issues and report them in good faith, and those reports are rejected without clear public explanation, it makes the entire vulnerability disclosure process less transparent. The security community relies on CVE identifiers to track and understand vulnerabilities. When a vendor rejects a report and no CVE is issued, it's harder for the community to assess the actual risk and make informed decisions. Bleeping Computer reports that Russian hackers have turned the Kasua backdoor into a modular peer-to-peer botnet. Kasua is a sophisticated backdoor that's been around for several years, associated with Russian intelligence operations. What's new is the architecture. They've re-engineered it to operate as a modular peer-to-peer botnet rather than traditional command and control infrastructure. In a P2P botnet, infected machines communicate with each other rather than connecting back to a central server. This makes the botnet much harder to take down. You can't just seize a command and control server and break the whole operation. The modular aspect means functionality can be added or changed on the fly. This represents a maturation of state-sponsored offensive capabilities. These aren't opportunistic cybercriminals. This is a well-resourced intelligence operation that's investing in long-term, resilient infrastructure. Organizations need to be thinking about threat models that include not just preventing initial compromise, but also detecting and containing sophisticated, persistent threats that can survive even after their initial access method is discovered. There are multiple WordPress plugin vulnerabilities being actively exploited right now. Bleeping Computer reports that the Funnel Builder plugin has a bug that's being exploited to steal credit cards, and separately, the Avada Builder plugin has flaws that allow site credential theft. WordPress plugins remain one of the most significant attack surfaces on the internet. WordPress powers something like 40% of all websites, and while WordPress core is generally well maintained and secure, the plugin ecosystem is vast and of variable quality. When a popular plugin has a vulnerability, it affects potentially millions of sites. What makes these particularly nasty is they're not just theoretical vulnerabilities, they're being actively exploited in the wild. If you're running a WordPress site, you need to be checking your plugin versions immediately and updating anything that's vulnerable. If you're running Funnel Builder or Avada Builder specifically, that's urgent. And more broadly, this is a reminder that plugin security needs to be part of your WordPress security strategy. Keep them updated, remove any you're not actively using, and consider whether you really need all the functionality you've added through plugins. Bleeping Computer also reports that the NoDip npm package has been compromised to steal credentials. This is a supply chain attack, and it's particularly concerning because NoDip is a fairly popular package in the JavaScript ecosystem with millions of downloads. What appears to have happened is that an attacker gained access to the maintainer's npm account and pushed a malicious update that contains code to steal credentials. Supply chain attacks on package repositories are one of the most effective attack vectors today because of how much we rely on third-party dependencies. When you run npm install, you're pulling in not just the packages you explicitly specify, but all of their dependencies, and dependencies of dependencies. If any link in that chain is compromised, you're pulling malicious code directly into your application. The npm ecosystem has particular challenges here because of how granular packages tend to be and how deep dependency trees can get. Organizations need to be using tools that monitor their dependencies for known vulnerabilities and suspicious changes, and in high-security environments, you might need to be maintaining internal mirrors of approved package versions rather than pulling directly from public repositories. Krebs on Security has his Patch Tuesday May 2026 edition write-up. Patch Tuesday is the second Tuesday of each month when Microsoft releases security updates, and this month was particularly significant. Brian Krebs notes that Microsoft patched several critical vulnerabilities, including ones being actively exploited. The Patch Tuesday post is always worth reading because Krebs provides context about which patches are most urgent and why. Not all patches are created equal. Some fix theoretical vulnerabilities that are hard to exploit. Others fix actively exploited 0 days. Organizations need to be prioritizing their patching based on actual risk, and Krebs does a good job cutting through the noise to identify what really needs immediate attention. Krebs also reports on a Canvas breach that's disrupting schools and colleges nationwide. Canvas is a learning management system used by thousands of educational institutions. A breach of Canvas is particularly impactful because it affects not just one organization, but potentially millions of students and educators across many institutions. The details of exactly what was compromised are still emerging, but any breach of an educational platform raises concerns about student data privacy and the disruption to learning. Educational institutions have become attractive targets for attackers because they often have limited security resources relative to their size, they handle valuable data, and they're under pressure to maintain availability. A disruption during exam periods or at critical points in the academic calendar can create substantial pressure to pay ransoms or make other concessions. Looking at CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, let's walk through some of the recent additions. CVEs 2000 and 26-42897 was added on May 15th with a due date of May 29th. This is a Microsoft Exchange server cross-site scripting vulnerability in Outlook Web Access. XSS vulnerabilities might sound less serious than remote code execution, but in the context of email and webmail, they can be quite dangerous. An attacker who can inject malicious scripts into Outlook Web Access can potentially steal session cookies, perform actions as the victim user, or steal sensitive information from emails. Federal civilian agencies are required to patch this by May 29th. CVEs 2000 and 26-20182, added May 14th with a due date of May 17th, that's tomorrow, affects Cisco Catalyst SD-WAN controller and manager. This is an authentication bypass vulnerability, meaning an unauthenticated remote attacker can bypass authentication entirely. This is about as serious as it gets for network infrastructure. SD-WAN controllers are critical infrastructure components that manage network traffic routing. Compromising one gives an attacker significant visibility and control over network traffic. The short deadline reflects the severity. CVE-2026-42208, added May 8th, affects Berry AI Lite LLM. This is a SQL injection vulnerability that allows an attacker to read and potentially modify data in the proxy's database. SQL injection remains one of the most common and dangerous web application vulnerabilities. Lite LLM is used for managing large language model deployments, so a compromise here could expose API keys, usage data, and potentially allow manipulation of how LLM requests are handled. CVE-2026-300 is the Palo Alto Network's PAN-OS vulnerability we've discussed before. This is the captive portal service out-of-bounds write vulnerability that allows unauthenticated remote code execution. This one got a lot of attention because it affects firewall appliances from a major security vendor, and the exploitation is relatively straightforward. If you're running PAN-OS, this should have been patched already, but it's worth verifying. CVE-2026-31431 is the Linux kernel vulnerability known as copy fail. This is described as an incorrect resource transfer between spheres vulnerability that allows privilege escalation. Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks described this as the most severe Linux threat in years. It affects a fundamental part of how the Linux kernel handles memory operations. The potential impact is that a local attacker can escalate to root privileges. Given how widely Linux is deployed, from servers to containers to embedded systems, the scope of this vulnerability is enormous. From the National Vulnerability Database recent CVEs, I'm seeing some older vulnerabilities in the feed, which happens periodically when historical vulnerabilities get added or updated.
CVE 1999-0095 is the sendmail debug command vulnerability allowing root access. These historical CVEs are interesting from a security history perspective, but the actionable ones are the recent discoveries. Schneier on Security has a post about bypassing on-camera age verification checks. This is relevant as various jurisdictions implement age verification requirements for online services. The technical challenge is, how do you verify someone's age online without creating privacy problems or systems that can be easily fooled? On-camera age verification typically uses computer vision and machine learning to estimate age from a video of the person's face. Schneier discusses research showing these systems can be bypassed through various means: carefully applied makeup, specific lighting, or using pre-recorded video. This matters because lawmakers are mandating age verification without always understanding the technical limitations. If a system can be easily bypassed, it provides security theater rather than actual protection, and it may create a false sense of security. SANS Internet Storm Center has a guest diary about new malware libraries, meaning new signatures. This gets at a fundamental challenge in malware detection. Signature-based detection looks for known patterns of malicious code. When malware authors change the libraries they use to build their malware, all the signatures become less effective. This is part of the ongoing cat-and-mouse game in security. Defenders develop signatures. Attackers change their code to evade those signatures. Defenders develop new signatures.
The post discusses how security teams need to be tracking not just individual malware samples, but the ecosystems and toolchains that malware authors are using. Now let's turn to our Palo Alto Unit 42 Threat Intelligence segment. Unit 42 has published research on Gremlin Stealer's evolved tactics, specifically how it's hiding in plain sight using resource files. Gremlin Stealer is information-stealing malware that targets credentials, browser data, cryptocurrency wallets, and other sensitive information. What's interesting about this evolution is the technique of hiding malicious code in resource files. Resource files are parts of Windows executable files that store things like icons, dialogues, and strings. They're not typically where you'd put executable code, which makes them a useful hiding place. Security tools often don't scrutinize resource sections as carefully as they do the main executable code. Gremlin Stealer is embedding malicious payloads in resource sections and then extracting and executing them at runtime. This is a clever evasion technique because it makes static analysis harder. When you look at the main executable code, it might appear relatively benign. The malicious behavior only emerges when the resource is processed. Unit 42's research documents how to detect this technique and provides indicators of compromise. Unit 42 also published research on Active Directory Certificate Services exploitation, unpacking advanced misuse techniques and tools. This is important because ADCS is a critical part of many enterprise Windows environments. It's what issues and manages digital certificates for authentication, encryption, and code signing. When ADCS is misconfigured or compromised, attackers can issue themselves certificates that grant persistent access, even if passwords are changed. The Unit 42 research goes deep into various escalation paths through ADCS, from template misconfigurations that allow privilege escalation to techniques for stealing certificate authority private keys. What makes ADCS particularly dangerous as an attack vector is that it's often not well understood, even by security teams. It's managed by infrastructure teams, it's complex, and the security implications of misconfigurations aren't always obvious. Attackers are increasingly targeting ADCS because a successful compromise can give them persistent, hard-to-detect access. The research provides both red team techniques and blue team defensive guidance. The threat brief on the PAN-OS Captive Portal 0-Day provides Unit 42's analysis of CVE-2000 and 26-300, which we mentioned earlier. The vulnerability allows unauthenticated remote code execution through the Captive Portal feature. Unit 42's analysis shows that exploitation is relatively straightforward, and they observed active exploitation in the wild shortly after the vulnerability became public. The brief provides details on the attack methodology, what attackers are doing post-exploitation, and comprehensive mitigation guidance. They also discuss the broader context of firewall vulnerabilities. When perimeter security devices themselves become attack vectors, it's particularly problematic because they're often externally accessible and they have visibility into all network traffic. Unit 42's research on copy fail, CVE-2000 and 26-31431, describes it as the most severe Linux threat in years. This vulnerability is in the Linux kernel's memory handling code, specifically in how the kernel transfers data between different security contexts. The vulnerability allows a local attacker to write to arbitrary memory locations, which can be leveraged to escalate to root privileges. What makes this particularly severe is the combination of factors. It affects the kernel, meaning it's present in virtually all Linux systems. It's relatively easy to exploit once you have local access. And it provides complete system compromise. In containerized environments, this could potentially allow container escape. In multi-tenant systems, it could allow one user to compromise other users' data or escalate to full system control. The Unit 42 research provides technical details on the exploitation mechanism and emphasizes the critical importance of patching. The NPM Threat Landscape update from Unit 42, updated May 1st, provides ongoing monitoring of supply chain attacks on the NPM ecosystem. Unit 42 tracks malicious packages, typo-squatting attacks, and compromised legitimate packages. Their analysis shows a significant increase in sophisticated supply chain attacks over the past year. Attackers are getting better at creating packages that provide legitimate functionality while also including malicious code that's hard to detect. They're using techniques like delayed execution, where malicious behavior only triggers after the package has been installed for a certain period, or conditional execution, where malicious code only runs in certain environments. The report provides mitigation strategies, including using NPM auditing tools, implementing software composition analysis, maintaining private package registries, and establishing processes for vetting dependencies before they're added to projects. Looking at the broader threat landscape, what we're seeing across all these sources is a continued professionalization of the threat actor ecosystem. Attacks are becoming more sophisticated, more targeted, and harder to detect. We're seeing convergence of techniques between different threat actor groups. What starts as a nation-state technique eventually makes its way into commodity malware. We're seeing increased focus on supply chain attacks because they're force multipliers. Compromise one package or one vendor, and you gain access to thousands of downstream targets. And we're seeing attackers getting better at persistence and evasion. It's not enough anymore to prevent initial compromise. Organizations need to assume breach and focus on detection, containment, and response. The theme that emerges from this week's intelligence is that the fundamentals matter more than ever. Patch management, access control, monitoring, incident response planning, these aren't exciting, but they're what actually protects organizations. The sophisticated attacks we're seeing work because they chain together multiple steps, exploiting a vulnerability here, escalating privileges there, moving laterally through the network, establishing persistence. If you can break that chain at any point through good security hygiene, you substantially reduce risk. That's not to minimize the challenge. The volume of vulnerabilities, the pace of change, and the sophistication of attackers make this genuinely difficult. But the core principles of good security haven't changed. That wraps up the first half of today's episode. When we come back, we'll be diving into AI and machine learning developments, looking at some fascinating research papers, and discussing the broader implications of where AI is heading. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Clovis Brief. Let's dive into the home lab and infrastructure world. Over on GitHub Trending, there's been some interesting movement in the self-hosting and infrastructure space. Cal.com's new Cal DIY project is gaining traction. This is their self-hosted calendar scheduling platform, and it's been climbing the trending charts. If you've been looking for an alternative to Calendly that you can run on your own infrastructure, this might be worth checking out. I'll link that in the show notes. Bun, the JavaScript runtime that's been making waves as a faster alternative to Node, continues to trend. Over on LobStarS, there's actually an interesting discussion titled, Bun's Problem May Be Developing in the Open. Apparently there's some tension around how they're handling their public development process. The post from zerosrof.net argues that maybe too much transparency during active development can create unnecessary friction with the community. It's a fascinating discussion about open source philosophy versus practical software development. Speaking of infrastructure tools, there's a story on LobStarS about getting Adobe Lightroom working on Linux using Claude Code. Someone successfully used an AI coding assistant to navigate all the wine configuration and dependency hell required to run Lightroom on Linux. It's on GitHub under sander110419/LightroomCC on Linux. This is an interesting example of AI tooling actually solving real problems, not just generating boilerplate, but actually helping with the messy, undocumented work of compatibility layers. For those running FreeBSD, LobStarS is highlighting the new design for the FreeBSD website. It's been completely refreshed with a modern look while maintaining accessibility. It's nice to see open source projects investing in their web presence. First impressions matter, especially when you're trying to attract new contributors. On the container front, Unit 42 from Palo Alto Networks has an updated report on the NPM threat landscape. Originally published on May 1st, they're tracking attack surface and mitigation strategies for the NPM ecosystem. Given that we saw the no-dip NPM package compromised to steal credentials earlier this week, Bleeping Computer covered that this report is particularly timely. If you're running Node applications or managing container images that depend on NPM packages, you'll want to review their recommendations. Supply chain security for JavaScript dependencies continues to be a major concern. For the Kubernetes crowd, there hasn't been a major release in the past few days, but the ecosystem continues to evolve. Helm charts are becoming more sophisticated, and we're seeing more organizations move toward GitOps workflows. If you haven't looked at Argo CD or Flux recently, they've both matured significantly. On the networking side, Cisco had a rough week. CISA added CVE 2026-2182 to their known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. That's an authentication bypass vulnerability in Cisco Catalyst, SD-WAN controller and manager. This is serious. It allows an unauthenticated remote attacker to bypass authentication entirely. The deadline for patching is May 17th. That's today, so if you're running Catalyst SD-WAN, you need to check your patch status immediately. OPNsense and pfSense users should be aware that while there haven't been any major vulnerability announcements this week, the general pattern we're seeing with enterprise networking gear having authentication bypasses should make everyone review their firewall configurations. Make sure you're not exposing management interfaces to the internet, enable multi-factor authentication where possible, and keep those systems patched. For Home Assistant users, the integration ecosystem continues to expand. While there weren't specific Home Assistant headlines in today's feed, the project's momentum hasn't slowed. If you're looking at home automation projects this weekend, remember that Zigbee and Z-Wave devices offer better local control than cloud-dependent solutions. The trend toward Matter support is also accelerating. More devices are shipping with Matter compatibility out of the box. On the Proxmox and Unraid front, both platforms remain stable. For those running Proxmox in home lab environments, the Proxmox Virtual Environment 7.4 release continues to be solid. Unraid users should be aware that supply chain security matters for your Docker containers too. That NPM compromise I mentioned earlier affects any containerized applications you might be running. One more thing from the infrastructure world. There's a GitHub repo that's been trending called Grid to Poster. It's a tool for designing posters that showcase your country's electrical grid. It's from the Open Energy Transition Organization. This is a fun way to visualize infrastructure, and it's gotten 61 points on Hacker News with 15 comments. If you're into infrastructure visualization or just want a cool poster for your office, check it out. Let's shift gears and look up at the stars with science and space news. NASA has been busy. The biggest news is that NASA Science and Cargo launched on the 34th SpaceX resupply mission to the International Space Station. This is a regular cadence now, but each mission carries crucial research equipment and supplies for the astronauts. It's remarkable how routine these launches have become. We've truly entered an era where space access is normalizing. The Mars Curiosity rover has been dealing with a pesky rock. NASA posted an image article titled, "Curiosity Shakes Loose a Pesky Rock." Apparently one of the rover's wheels picked up a stone that got stuck, and the team had to maneuver the rover to shake it loose. It's a good reminder that even with billions of dollars of engineering, sometimes you just need to shake something to make it work. The rover continues its mission exploring Gale Crater, and these little operational challenges are just part of deep space robotics. The Hubble Space Telescope has captured images of a galaxy in transition. NASA Science published this observation. It's fascinating to watch galaxies in states of change. These observations help astronomers understand galactic evolution, star formation rates, and the role of dark matter in shaping large-scale structures. Hubble, despite being over 3 decades old, continues to deliver groundbreaking science. The James Webb Space Telescope gets a lot of attention, but Hubble's visible and ultraviolet capabilities remain unmatched. NASA's Earth Observatory is picturing Earth in a new light. This is about new imaging techniques and sensors that are revealing environmental changes we couldn't see before. Climate monitoring, land use changes, ocean health, these satellite observations provide ground truth for environmental science. It's not just pretty pictures. This data drives policy decisions and helps us understand our planet's complex systems. On the Mars front, NASA is drawing on industry partners for a Mars telecommunications network. This is forward-looking infrastructure planning. If we're serious about sustained Mars exploration and eventual human missions, we need robust communications infrastructure. Think of it as building out the interplanetary internet. These contracts to industry partners represent NASA's shift toward commercial space partnerships, similar to what we've seen with the Commercial Crew program. For space enthusiasts, there's a wonderful project on Hacker News called Ask an Astronaut. It's 333 hours of Q and a footage with astronauts, indexed by the ISS position in real time. It's at askanastronaut.isinrealtime.org. This is exactly the kind of educational resource that makes the internet special. 40 points on Hacker News with 5 comments. If you're looking for something to watch this weekend, or if you have kids interested in space, this is a treasure trove. Ars Technica has a fascinating story about solar power production being undercut by coal pollution. The irony is profound. Particulate pollution from coal-fired power plants reduces the efficiency of solar panels by blocking sunlight. It's a direct measurement of how fossil fuel pollution undermines renewable energy infrastructure. This is happening in regions where both coal plants and solar farms operate in proximity. The policy implications are significant. Cleaning up coal pollution doesn't just help health outcomes, it literally makes renewable energy more efficient. In other scientific news, Ars Technica reports that a revolutionary cancer treatment could transform autoimmune disease. This is about CAR T-cell therapy, which has been remarkably successful in treating certain blood cancers. Researchers are now investigating whether the same approach, essentially reprogramming immune cells to target specific proteins, could work for autoimmune conditions where the immune system attacks healthy tissue. Early trials are promising. This is fundamental immunology translating into real treatments. There's also a story about a false positive hantavirus case. The US outbreak cases dropped from 11 to 10 after one test turned out to be incorrect. This is a good reminder about the importance of confirmatory testing in outbreak situations. Hantavirus is serious, but false positives create unnecessary panic and waste public health resources. Over in more unusual science news, there's research on cannibalistic attacks between grey seals. Scientists have identified telltale corkscrew injuries that reveal these attacks. Science magazine has the story. It's gruesome but fascinating. Animal behavior can be surprising, and understanding predation patterns, even within species, helps marine biologists understand ecosystem dynamics. Let's talk business, economy, and what's happening locally. Bloomberg is reporting that Ed Yardeni, that's a prominent market strategist, is urging the Federal Reserve to drop its easing bias or risk losing control of interest rates. This is about market expectations versus Federal Reserve policy. With inflation proving stickier than expected, Yardeni argues that the Fed's dovish stance is undermining its credibility. Bond markets are already pricing in uncertainty, and if the Fed loses control of the yield curve, we could see broader financial instability. Korean stocks are rebounding from near-correction territory, helped by a Samsung rally. Asian markets have been volatile lately, driven by semiconductor sector concerns and broader worries about AI infrastructure spending. Samsung's recovery suggests that maybe the worst fears about chip demand were overblown. The Indonesian rupiah fell to a record low, driven by oil market dynamics as markets reopened after the weekend. Commodity currencies are under pressure, and this reflects global economic uncertainty. Corn and wheat jumped after the US indicated that China might buy billions in farm goods beyond just soybeans. Agricultural commodity markets are extremely sensitive to trade policy, and any thaw in US-China agricultural trade has immediate price impacts. For consumers, this might eventually translate to food price changes, though the path from commodity markets to grocery stores is complex. In the tech industry, Anthropic's $1.5 billion copyright settlement is getting messy, according to Ars Technica. A judge is delaying approval as authors fight for higher payouts. This is about the use of copyrighted material in training AI models, and it's a bellwether case for how these disputes will be resolved. The AI industry's relationship with content creators and copyright holders remains contentious, and these settlements will establish precedents for years to come. Microsoft had an interesting week on the security front. Bleeping Computer reports that Microsoft rejected a critical Azure vulnerability report and didn't issue a CVE. This is unusual and controversial. When security researchers find and report vulnerabilities, companies typically acknowledge them and issue tracking numbers. Microsoft's refusal suggests either they don't believe the vulnerability is exploitable in practice, or there's a disagreement about severity. This creates tension in the security research community and potentially leaves customers uncertain about risk. Locally, here in the Wonder Lake, Crystal Lake, Woodstock area of McHenry County, it's been a quiet weekend. We're looking at cooler weather coming in midweek, with temperatures dropping into the 50s by Wednesday and Thursday. If you've been putting off outdoor projects, tomorrow and Tuesday look like your best bets before the cooler air arrives. For those following local tech scene developments, there haven't been major announcements from the Chicago tech corridor this week, but the broader trend of remote work continues to impact our area. More tech workers are choosing to live in McHenry County while working remotely for Chicago or even out-of-state companies, which is changing our local housing market and community dynamics. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Clovis Brief. We covered a lot of ground today, from Windows 0 days to AI assistant capabilities, from WordPress plugin vulnerabilities to Galaxy observations, from home lab infrastructure to market dynamics. Tomorrow we'll be diving into more security news, looking at what's trending in the development world, and I've got some thoughts on the state of AI coding assistants after seeing that Lightroom on Linux story. We'll also check in on any new developments from the weekend. Until then, keep your systems patched, your backups tested, and your curiosity engaged. This is the Clovis Brief. Stay secure out there.